Hey, what's up, everybody? What's up? So we're trying to get through the transcript, I believe, from the first couple of hearings in the R. Kelly trial, and right now we're on page A64. So as I can remember, we we saw Demetrius Smith being questioned, which is the gentleman who got the fake ID for Leah, and we also saw Jane Doe number 5 testify, aka Azriel. And up to this point, we finally have seen it be revealed to R. Kelly that Azriel was underage, and that's through the testimony of Azriel in the last video that I did. And we haven't seen R. Kelly being made aware that she was underage as it pertained to, meeting her at the concert and basically having her flown all over the United States to meet him at concerts. At those particular times, it looks like he didn't know, but eventually she finally tells him that she's underage. So we're just gonna go ahead and continue on with this testimony, and hopefully we're going or continue on with this transcript, and hopefully soon we're going to see the cross-examination of Azrielclary. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into this, right? What, if any, and this is a question from Ms. Giddens, I believe, right? What, if anything, did you do to prepare for moving to Chicago? So this is at the point where R. Kelly finds out that she is underage and she's actually still in school. So what he decides to do, he speaks to his lawyer, and for what I can remember, they make arrangements for Azriel to move in with R. Kelly, right? So this is why we have that line of question. What, if anything, did you do to prepare for moving to Chicago? I had packed a few suitcases, and my mom had given the defendant a long list of things that I would need for school, and they took the steps to get me enrolled into homeschooling. So again, so we know that the mom knows that she's moving in with R. Kelly. So at this point, the mom is well aware. Keep in mind, when R. Kelly first met her, or when R. Kelly first met Azriel, he was texting the mother back and forth, believing that the mother was actually Azriel. So the mother already knows what's going on between her daughter and Azriel. The only way that she doesn't is that she's an absolute fool, or she's an absolute moron, right? That's the only way that you don't know. But more than likely she knows, and she probably created this environment, right? Because she's texting R. Kelly back and forth. Hopefully we get to the point where we see what was actually in those texts, right? And then it goes on. And do you recall the name of the school you were homeschooled? It was still for my county, which was Orange County. It was Florida Virtual Online. And you're using the term homeschool. Yes. But how would you communicate with your teachers during homeschool? Via laptop that the defendant had purchased. We were in the presence of your teachers. I'm sorry, were you in the presence of your teachers? Not physically, no, but virtually, yes. What, if anything, did, and then Mrs. Geddes, actually, I'm going to show the witness only what's marked for identification as government exhibit 475A, right? And then she asked, do you recognize what's shown in 475? Yes, I do. And I'm sorry, hold on a second. So she says 475. She says, yes, I do. And she says 475A. I'm sorry. What is shown in 475A? This is a letter that he told me that his attorneys had needed. Mr. Kennick, objection, court overruled. And it's basically saying that I would be, don't read into the evidence of the court. Sorry. That's all right. The court. And then it says, it's just a letter from my mother giving consent. For you to do what? For me to be in Chicago under a woman that he had known. And you use he a couple of times in that sentence. Who is the he that you're referring to? The defendant. And what was the date that this letter was prepared? September 19, 2015. How old were you then? I was still 17. Mrs. Geddes, the government offers 475, and basically put that into evidence, right? Then it goes on. And I like to publish only to the jury and without reading the names, either yours or anyone else's. Can you please read what's shown in 475A? It says, we the parents of me give me consent for me to stay with another person, right? Yes, until 12/30/2015, December 30th, 2015. At that time, she will be under her care. And who, if anyone, signed that letter? My mother. And what happened on December 30th, 2015? It was my birthday. How old were you turning? 18. Mrs. Geddes, I'm now showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as a government exhibit 476A. Do you recognize what's shown in government exhibit 476A? Yes, I do. What is that? This is a proper formal letter of what the previous letter was. Huh? This is a proper formal letter of what the previous letter was. That one that you just read, 475A. Yes. And were you present for any of this letter when it was made? Yes, I was. It had to be notarized. And where was it notarized? Orange County Clerk in Florida? Yes. And were you present for that? Yes, I was. And then basically they put that into evidence, right? And may I just publish it to the jury briefly? The court, yes. Now, in both 475A and 476A, there's an individual listed and who would be caring for you. Is that correct? Yes. Do you know that individual's daughter? Yes, I do. Who is that individual's daughter? Juice. And then it goes on. That one, the one that the defendant introduced you to in Las Vegas, yes? What, if anything, did you do with the documents shown in 475 and 475A and 476A? The defendant needed them for his attorneys. How did you know that? He had expressed to me that he needed it, so what did you do with it? I had given them to him and I had returned back to Chicago. So did you, in fact, then return to Chicago? I did, yes. And how did you get back to Chicago? His assistant had booked me my travel. And who paid for that? The defendant. Now, when you returned, do you remember, by the way, approximately when you went back to Chicago? I do not. And then it goes on. You testified earlier that you told the defendant that you were, in fact, 17 because you had to get back for your senior year. Is that right? Yes. And when did your senior year begin? I don't remember the exact month that it happened, and because I had already late because I stayed in Chicago. However, I did attend school for a week before I was pulled out of school. Okay, do you know just approximately when? I'm sorry. Okay, do you know just approximately then what season does school start? Fall. Okay. Do you remember what season it was when you returned to Chicago? Possibly September. Okay, 2015. Yes. And how old were you then? Still 17. Did you stay in Chicago when you returned to Chicago? We did go to Chicago and also Atlanta. And did you go on tour with the defendant? I did, yes. Do you remember the name of that tour? It was his, I believe, the buffet tour. And when you say that you went to the tour with the defendant, what does that mean, or what did you? I'm sorry, I'm really fucking this up. And when you say that you went on tour with the defendant, what does that mean, or do you mean by that, or what do you mean by that? By this time, because I was living with the defendant, he had expressed to me that he wanted me to be closer to him, and we traveled via tour bus. And so previously you testified that you would fly from city to city to see the defendant. Is that correct? Yes. Was this a change now that you would travel by tour bus from city to city? Yes. What would you do when you arrived at a particular stop on tour? Do you mean like a pit stop or a stop for a show? Would you attend the show? Sometimes I would, sometimes I would not. No. And what would you do if you weren't attending the show? I would stay on the tour bus, or I would see him before or after his show backstage. And by him, who are you referring to? The defendant. You mentioned that you were on the tour bus. Who, if anyone else, was on a tour bus with you? For the most part, it was me and him. However, sometimes Juice would be on the tour bus with us. And who drove the tour bus? his driver of the tour bus at the time. Did you learn the driver's name? Yes. How did you learn the driver's name? From the defendant. Were you introduced to the driver? I was not. No. Was the driver's name that the defendant? I'm sorry. What was the driver's name that the defendant? How did the defendant refer to the driver? As Top Gun. I'm showing the witness what's marked for identification as Government Exhibit 17. Do you recognize what's shown in 17? Yes, I do. What is it? This is his tour bus driver. Top Gun? Yes, it is. And then Mrs. Geddes, the government officer, and they put that um, into the into evidence, right? Now, was there a bathroom on the tour bus? Yes, there were two. Could you use them? Yes, I could. What, if anything, would you do after you use the toilet on the tour bus? I would have to knock before I could leave the washroom. And by knock, what do you mean? I would have to knock on the door until he would say, come on, before I could leave the restroom. So you were inside the bathroom when you were knocking? Yes. When you said he, who are you referring to? The defendant. What, if anything, what if any sexual contact did you have with the defendant while you were traveling on the tour bus when you were 17 years old? We would have oral sex or vaginal penetration. Were those encounters ever recorded? Yes, they were. Who recorded them? The defendant. With what? His iPads. The court. Mrs. Geddes, it's almost 1 o'clock. This would be a good time to stop. Yes, Judge. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break for lunch. Please don't talk about the case at all, but we'll be back here at 2:15 and enjoy your lunches. And then the court basically releases the group. All right. Anything before we break for lunch? Let me just skip through all this. Well, I guess I shouldn't skip. Who knows what may pop out. So all rise. Jury exits the courtroom. Everyone can have a seat. Let's take a witness. We'll see you after lunch. All right. Anything before we break for lunch? Mrs. Geddes, nothing from the government. The court. I know this is probably a pointless question, but do you know about how much more you have with the witness? I think we're about halfway through. The court. Okay. I also just want to advise the parties that we'll take both days of Rosh Hashanah. The question then is, although I think the jurors have really arranged their schedules around this Friday off, so I think we'll just stick with the plan of when there's not a holiday during the week. We'll take that Friday. All right, Mrs. Geddes, I'm sorry, I did not have one thing to raise. I'm sorry. The court, sure. Which is a way from a getaway. Go ahead. This witness, there are two questions that I would ask her that a truthful answer would call for her to reference the defendant's prior trial and the nature of those charges. The first, which I haven't asked her yet, which was, why did you tell the defendant that you were 18 when you were in fact 17? Her answer is that she was aware of the fact that he had previously been charged with sexual exploitation of a minor. In addition, I anticipate that this witness is going to testify about letters that the defendant had her write, including numerous falsehoods and embarrassing mentions, and she will testify that one of the reasons that the defendant explained that she was doing this was that it could protect him, and so the past was not repeated, and he will reference conversations with his attorneys. I would ask that I don't know how much of this would come out, but I would ask that she be permitted to testify truthfully in response to these questions and that we not limit her answers. The court, well, I think I made a similar ruling. I don't think you actually ever asked the question with a prior witness. I think we had come to some sort of an agreement, but Mr. Kenneth, I don't know, and your views have changed on that. Mr. Kenneth, I don't think it has, Your Honor, but I will certainly discuss this with my team. The other thing, Your Honor, the court, into the microphone, please. Mr. Kenneth, I may have an issue with the verbiage that the government intends to eliciting in terms of sexual exploitation of minors. Frankly, I don't know what the specific charges were. I don't think Mrs. Geddes maybe was just speaking generally. Can either do it by leading the witness a little bit through that, or just referring generally that he had his prior However, you plan to refer to it without calling it sexual exploitation of a minor. I think that's what he's actually charged with, but she is not going to say that at all. All right. So after lunch, why don't you just give us a heads up about what that might be? And then, like I say, I think this is the same ruling I made the last time, so I don't think much has changed. But let us know after the break. Mrs. Geddes, I will. The court, all right, thanks everybody. And then they break for lunch. And then they come back from lunch, all rise, everybody can have a seat. Are we ready for the witness? Oh, I know we were going to. Did you all figure out what it is, Mrs. Geddes? We haven't, but let me just tell the defendant. Okay. So discussion was had off the record, and then it goes. Okay, so we've resolved whatever. It wasn't even a dispute. You're both on the same page about how the witness is going to describe this, Mrs. Geddes. I think so. I just want to ask counsel one more thing. Discussion had off the record. I'm assuming you've worked this out. We're fine. All right. If you need me to let me know, all right, let's get the witness and then let's get the jury. Mrs. Geddes. Oh, Your Honor, we may use a board on the easel if that's okay with the court. The court. I don't, well, my problem, I guess, but I don't understand how you're going to use it. Who can see it? Mrs. Geddes, we're hoping the jury, the court, but it's facing her. Okay, let's get the jury. Jury enters courtroom. Your Honor, can we approach just for one small matter with the court reporter? Mrs. Geddes, yes, please. Okay, and then the court and the all rise. Jury enters courtroom. You may be seated. And then we continue on to the next page for the sidebar conference. The following occurred at the sidebar. Mrs. Geddes, Your Honor, I just received an email conveyed by our officers that the court reporter or the court sketch, not court sketch artist wanted to know if she could be blurring the faces of the individuals who are testifying under pseudonyms. We would support that. We would support that they be blurred just to further protect their identities, although I'll be candid. Those, Mr. Kennett, you can't tell from the sketches anyway. Mrs. Geddes, I don't disagree with you anyhow. Mr. Kennett, sketches look like Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse. You realize that sometimes these transcripts get released. Well, they do get released, and I have a copy of it now. I'm going to weigh in on that. First of all, I don't think that, at least it's my hope that nobody can tell who you are from those sketches. So I think that's not a big deal. Mrs. Geddes, thank you, Judge. In the sidebar conference. All right, so I guess this is where they're actually going to resume. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you had a good lunch. We are ready to resume with a direct examination of the witness. Go ahead. Courtroom deputy, the witness is reminded that she'll still under oath. She'll still be under oath. And then it goes on. When you first started living with the defendant and after you moved back to Chicago in 2015, who, if anyone, from the high school did you stay in touch with? I stayed in touch with Malak and a friend of mine named Mia. How do you stay in touch with them? Via text messages and through Snapchat. I want to ask you to keep your voice up a little bit. Your Honor, can I have that answer read back? Sure. And then they read it and then it goes on. Now, do you remember what, if anything, the defendant did on October 2nd, 2015? No. I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 205A. I'm showing the witness what's marked for identification as Government Exhibit 205A. Why that's there twice, I don't know. Do you recognize what's shown on 205A? Yes, I do. Does that refresh your recollection as to what happened on October 2nd, 2015? Yes. What happened that day? I had expressed to a friend of mine that he had ejaculated inside of me. Ooh, wow. Okay. And when you say he, who are you referring to? The defendant. And did you tell your friend this because this, in fact, had happened on that day? Yes, it did. And when do you recall you were in early October 2015? I do not know. What, if anything, do you recall happening on October 4th, 2 days after of that same year? I do not recall. I'm showing the witness only what's been marked as identification as Government Exhibit 205D. And actually, may I approach, Your Honor? Yes. All right. I thought you wanted a sidebar. Mrs. Giddens, oh no. Uh, does looking at 205D refresh your recollection as to what, if anything, happened on October 5th of 2015 or October 4th of 2015? Yes, what happened? I had a conversation between a friend, and it was describing how an abortion, the procedure for an abortion. Why were you having that conversation with your friend? Because he had ejaculated inside of me. And what, if anything, were you concerned about? Pregnant, pregnancy, because we had not used protection ever. Do you recall having a conversation with the defendant about what he would do if you were, in fact, pregnant? I do. How did the defendant react? He did, in fact, say that he would want me to get an abortion because he wanted me to keep my body tight. And how, if anything, I'm sorry, and how, if at all, did the defendant say your age was a factor in that decision? My age was a factor. What did he say? He said that if I was any other age, it wouldn't make a difference. And how old were you then? I was 17. How do you feel when you believe that you might be pregnant and might have to get an abortion? I was scared. The government offers 205A and 205D. Any objection? No, Your Honor. Okay. And then, and just to be clear, do you recall who were talking about this? I'm sorry. And just to be clear, do you recall who you were talking about this with? I mean, it's so hard to read this because I don't know what the court reporter was doing. Or I don't know if, they were saying this that way and that she just recorded verbatim, or if the court reporter left out words. But do you recall who you were talking to about with this? I don't know. Anyway, so it was either me or Malek. Mrs. Gates, I published 205A. Yes, jury only. Jury only, please. And there's several blurbs here. Who wrote that reflected here? There. I'm sorry. I wrote those messages. And what is the date on which these were sent? October 3rd, 2015. And can you read what's written here where my pen is pointed? I said, he nutted in me before he nutted in me before his show today. And again, you're referring to the defendant. Yes, I was. And what did you mean by the term nutted? He ejaculated inside of me. And how about what did you mean by his show before his performance? And again, for the jury only, may I publish 205D? The court, yes. Where am I putting my pen? Well, let me start with on the first page. Who sent those text messages? I sent those text messages. And on what date? October 5th, 2015. And where my pen is, what does it say? It says, I'm going to kill myself. And what did you send after that? The procedure of how an abortion is done. Were those photographs of that? Yes, it was. And I'm now turning to the fourth page, 205D. Can you, again, who wrote these and who sent these text messages on this page? Page 4 of 205D. I did. Can you read what you wrote where my pen is pointed? Yes, I said I can't go through with this. What were you referring to? An abortion. And now where my pen is pointed, can you read that? He nutted in me today. And now, just for the record, who are you referring to? He in the sentence, the defendant. And how about here? Can you read that? Where is my pen pointed? But he said we need to look into an abortion stuff because he wants to keep my body right and tight. And I'm now turning to the 8th page of 205D. Can you read where my pen is pointed? Now, if I was 18 and below that, he wouldn't care about the baby, speaking that I'm 17. What did you mean by that? He had expressed to me that he had been any other age that he would have wanted to start a family. And again, just for the record, he wrote these text messages shown on page 8. I sent these messages. I'm sorry. Again, just for the record, who wrote these text messages shown on page 8? And then she says, I sent these messages. And by the way, this is Azriel if it's not obvious at this point. If you're just tuning in, this is like the fourth video in the series that I'm reading. And there, I'm showing you page 6 of that. There are some text messages in gray and some in blue. What does the gray indicate regarding who sent them? Me. And how about the blue? That is who I'm speaking to. And I want to direct your attention to page 5. Do you see where my pen is pointing? Yes. And what does it say? It says, tell Maya. Does that refresh your recollection as to who you were talking to in this text message? Yes. Who was it? Malak. And how do you know that? Because I told her to tell Maya. And and one line up there, it says like FR. What do you mean like that? Like for real? FR stands for real? Yes. And above there, you also reference a Plan B pill. What do you mean by Plan B pill? That is a pill that you take immediately after someone has ejaculated inside of you. Now, did you ultimately learn whether or not you were pregnant in October 2015? I was not. You testified earlier about the defendant wanting to limit communications about him with your friends. Do you recall that testimony? Yes, I do. Why were you able to communicate with your friends about what was going on between you and the defendant in those text messages? I would delete the text messages out of my phone, and I had told both of them never to text me unless I was to text them first. And why did you do that? Because I knew the defendant was very controlling about who I spoke to and what I spoke about. Were were there certain times when the defendant spent more time away from you? Yes. Where where would that occur? It would just depend on the city that we were in and his schedule. And where were there any cities that you recall where the defendant was less likely to be around you and more likely to be somewhere else? Not necessarily. No, if I was with him. Okay, and those text messages were you referring reference to Plan B? What did you understand the purpose of Plan B pill to be? It would kill whatever possibility of life. And was the purpose so that you wouldn't continue to be pregnant? Yes. Now, in those text messages, do you recall your testimony early today about those trips to California? I do. And while you were 17, did you take additional trips to California with the defendant? Yes, I did. And do you remember where you traveled to? I do not. Do you remember what the purpose of your travel was for? He had shows. And while you were traveling in California to see the defendant or to accompany the defendant while he performed at his shows, do you recall whether or not any of your sexual contact with the defendant was recorded? Yes, it was. And what was it recorded with? An iPad that was in his possession at all times. And that was when you were 17. Yes. What, if anything, do you recall sending your friends on October 19th of 2015? I don't recall. I'm showing the witness. I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 205F. Do you recognize what's shown in 205F? I do. Does that refresh recollection as to what, if anything, you sent to your friends on October 19th of 2015? I do, yes. What did you send your friends? I sent them pictures of me and the defendant. Why did you do that? Because I just needed someone else to have proof just in case anything happened. And you say you were concerned in case something happened? Do you remember what type of phone you had back then? At the time, I had an iPhone that the defendant had paid for. Do you remember when you got the iPhone? When I left to be homeschooled earlier that year, and what, if anything, did the defendant say about that iPhone? He made me put a passcode on it, but he was to know the passcode at all times. Do you still have the iPhone? I do not. Why not? The defendant broke it. And I want to be direct. Well, the government offers 205F, and they basically put that into evidence. Whose writing is in gray? Me. And right there, I'm sorry, hold on a second. Yeah. And right there and right here, when my pen, where my pen is, what did you write? I said, keep these. What are you referring to? The photographs that I sent. Now where where my pen is pointed, that first photograph on 205F, what is that? That is defendant. Who took that picture? I took that picture. Where did you take it? He was actually shooting the cover art of his Buffet Tour album cover art. And the Buffet Tour was the one that you were on when you returned to live with the defendant after you started homeschooling. Is that right? Yes. And turning to page 2 where my pen is pointing, what is that a photograph of? That is a photograph that the defendant took with me and him. Do you recall where? Yes, we were in the fitting room at the studio. He was shooting his album cover. And I'm sorry, what is the room that you were in? It was a fitting room where you would change. And is that you on the right? Yes, it is. How old are you? I'm 17 years old. And about how old were you where my pen is pointing? I'm sorry. And how about where my pen is pointing here and here? Who who are in those photos? That is me and the defendant. Was that taken in the same location? Yes, it was. And how about this one where my pen is pointed? Yes, that is me and the defendant. Same place. Yes. And finally, I'm going to turn to the last page. Where my pen is pointed, who is that a photograph of? Me and the defendant. Do you remember where that was taken? It was the same day. He appears to be in a different clothing now. How is that? Oh no, he had changed his outfits. And was that a part of the shoot that was going on? Yeah, he had multiple looks. Do you recall where you were on November 14th, 2015, and where you were going? I do not. The government. I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as 205I. Can you take a look at that and let us know if that refreshes your recollection as to where you had been and where you were going? Yes. Where had you been? I have been to LA and Vegas. Do you recall why you were in Los Angeles and Las Vegas? Yes, we had shows. And and where were you going? Back to Chicago. And can you take another look at that? Yeah, we were in Chicago. Sorry. W- uh, where were you going? To New York. When were you scheduled to leave for New York? The next day. And what is the date of these November 14th, 2015? And the government offers 205I into evidence. Basically, put that in evidence. By the way, did you wear glasses back then? I did. What type of glasses? Can you describe the glasses that you wore? I had a few large frames and I had a few small rectangular size frames. And was the defendant aware of your friend Malak? Who were you exchanged those text messages with? Objection. Objection by Mr. Kennick. He was. The court. Are you objecting? Yes. Oh, can you do that? I'm sorry. Oh, can you do it so I can hear you? Thanks. The objection is overruled. Was the defendant aware of your Was the defendant aware of your friend Malak? He was. What, if anything, did you tell him about your friend Malak? Uh, I'm I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing her name wrong because at first I thought it was a guy. I want to say Malak. I don't know. If you know how to pronounce this girl's name, put it in the comments below. Maybe I'll look it up later. And then it goes on. I had told him that she was my cousin. What did you tell? I'm sorry, I got distracted. I had told him that she was my cousin. Why did you tell the defendant was Malak your cousin? She is not. Why did you tell the defendant that she was your cousin? I felt that if I told him that she was a family member, that he would allow me to stay in communication with her. And I'm showing you what's been marked for identification 205J. Do you recognize what's shown in 205J? Yes, I do. What is that? It's a video from my best friend, Maya. And how did you react when you received that video? I was anxious. How had you received the video? Through text messages. And about receiving the video made you, what about receiving the video made you anxious? Because the defendant had the passwords to my phone and he could check my phone and he didn't really allow me to talk to them. And what, if anything, how did you respond to your friend after you received that video? I told her that she couldn't do it. And why did you tell your friend that she couldn't do it? She couldn't do that, I'm sorry. Because he checks my phone. The government offers 205J. No objection. Okay. And can we publish this? Yes. Go ahead. Jury only. I want to direct your attention to this, indicating where my pen is pointed. What is shown there? It's a video of my friend Mia. And where my pen is now pointed, what is that there? Is a text message for me. And what did you say in your text message? Can you read it to me? You know, y'all can't do. I'm sorry. Y'all can't do that because he checks my phone. And when you saw y'all can't, and when you say y'all, I'm sorry. And when you saw, it should be say. And when you saw y'all can't do that, who were you referring to? Who was that? I'm sorry. Who was the you in that? Malik and Maya. And were those your friends from high school? Yes. And when you said check my phone, who was the he in the sentence? The defendant. And turning to the second page, can you read this blue entry indicating where my pen is pointed? He's going to say if he see the video. And how do you respond right below? He's going to be like, why is that your boyfriend when you say you be texting your cousin? I'm sorry. He's going to be like, why is that your BF when you say you be texting your cousin? Who do you mean by? I mean, who did you mean by BF there? What did you mean by BF? Best friend. And what were you saying in this particular text message? Meaning that he only allowed me to talk to Malak because I had told her that she was family. However, Mia, he did not want me to communicate with her. And can you read, Mrs. Geddes? I turn to page 3. Can you read the response on page 3? I just want to. I'm sorry. I just don't want to have to go to block your number because he think I'm being immature. That's why I deleted apps and everyone's number because I gotta show some age now that I'm with a 48-year-old. So doing so has made me grow out of a lot of young habits. Just don't want to ruin the one shot I have at being able to talk to you. And when you reference the 48-year-old, who were you referring to? The defendant. And finally, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as 205M. Do you recognize what's shown in 205M? Yes, I do. And I'm going to turn the page. Can you take a look at that for a moment? Yes, I do. Generally speaking, what's shown in this particular exhibit? Basically, me texting saying that certain things that they can't do because it would get me caught up. And what is it that you didn't want your friends to do? They couldn't text me or reach out to me like without me doing so first. And when you said it would get you caught up, what did that mean? Meaning like I would get into it would cause a altercation between me and the defendant. And turning to page 1, can you tell me what the dates of the communications were? January 8th, 2016. And then they put that into evidence. And then it goes on. And I'm turning to page 2. Is this just for the jury? Yes, just for the jury. Make sure you let me know. And then it goes on. Can you read what you wrote? Is the great text message that you sent? Yes. Can you read what you wrote there? Texting, you will get me caught up. And where my text message, oh, I'm sorry, where my pen is pointing, indicating what does that say? You got to learn how to use code, baby girl. That's what baby G is. Yes. And what did you mean by that? Meaning that there was a specific way that she would be able to talk to me. And if it wasn't like everyday stuff, then she could text me. And by everyday stuff, what are you referring to? Like if it wasn't just for her saying, how are you, or how are your nails, or is your hair, how is your hair? If it wasn't what he would call, I'm sorry, what he wouldn't would call it, innocent stuff, then I wasn't able to talk about. Then I wasn't able to talk to them about anything personal. And who were you referring to when you said he? The defendant. You testified earlier that you were concerned because if the defendant had learned about these text communications, there would be an altercation. What did you mean by that? In 2015, the defendant had introduced me to what he called chastising. And what are chastising, or what do you mean by chastising? Spankings. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, in the beginning of the time that you spent with the defendant, what, if anything, did the defendant tell you about other females in his life? The defendant did tell me that he had multiple women and girlfriends. How did you react to that? I was okay with that. What, if anything, did you eventually learn about his relationship with those other females? I had learned that they were actually all living together. How did you learn? I had learned from the defendant. In what way? When we were in Atlanta and anywhere that would be, I had at the studio and in Atlanta had a guest house in which they all lived there. And by they, who are you referring to? Are you referring to the other females that you just mentioned? Yes. Do you recall when you learned that the defendant was living with other females? I do, yes. When was it? It was in Atlanta. And approximately how long had you been spending time with the defendant at the time that you learned that he was living with other females? It was in 2015. Do you remember how long it was, though, that you had been with the defendant? Probably about 4 or 5 months. And how old were you there? I was 17. And by then, were you still having sexual contact with the defendant? I was, yes. Without using any full names, who did you learn was living with the defendant at the time? Nick, Juice, Joy, and V. I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 69B. Do you recognize 69B? Yes, I do. What is 69B? This is Nick. And then they put that into evidence. And I'm showing the witness only what's now being marked for identification as 69C. And before I do you know Nick's first and last name? I do. I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as 69C. On top, is that the same photograph that was just shown in 69B? It is, yes. And below, there is a name. Is that the name that you know to be the first and last name of Nick? It is, yes. And then they put that into evidence. And then they move on. I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as 52B, as in boy. Do you recognize what's shown in 52B? I do. What is that? That's Juice. And then they put that into evidence. And Mrs. Geddes, I am now showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as 52C. And before I do so, do you know the first and last name of Juice? I do. I'm showing you 52C on top. Is that the same photograph in 52B? It is. And below that, is that the first and last name that you know of Juice who's shown in 52B and C? It is. The government offers 52C and asks that it will be published, basically put that into evidence. And I'm showing the witness only what's been marked as identification as Government Exhibit 72. Do you recognize 72? I do. Who is 72V? And they put that into evidence. And I'm showing the witness only what's been marked as for identification as Government Exhibit 78. Do you recognize 78? I do. Who is that? Joy. And do you know, Mrs. Geddes, the government offers 78. Any objections? No objections. Okay, that's in evidence. They put that in evidence. And do you know Joy's first and last name? I do. Mrs. Geddes, I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as 78A, and where my pen is indicating is that the same photograph that was just shown in Government Exhibit 78? It is. And below that, is that the first and last name of Joy? It is. I mean, yes. And then they put that into evidence. So it looks like they basically identified the women that were basically living with Kels. Now you testified earlier that you found out that the defendant was living with multiple females about 4 or 5 months in. Yes. How old were you when that happened? I was 17. And so when you say 4 to 5 months, do you mean 4 to 5 months from when you started, when you met the defendant? Mr. Kennick, objection. What do you mean by 4 or 5 months? Well, I had initially met all of them from time to time. However, I didn't know that they were his girlfriends, that he was living with them. When did you learn? Though, though that he was living with them in relation to when you first met the defendant. About 4 to 5 months after meeting him. Now, did you continue to spend time with the defendant after you learned that he was living with these other females? I did. What, if any, rules the defendant set with respect to how you should interact with these other women? He told me to listen to whatever they said because it was basically coming from him. And how much, if any, information did you understand you would be sharing with these individuals, these women that he was living with? I could not share any of my personal information with them. And how did you know that? The defendant had told me not to. Now, though, through your testimony today, you've testified about certain rules that the defendant wanted you to follow. What, if anything, would happen if you did not follow those rules? I would be chastised. And what do you mean, again, by chastising? Meaning that he would spank me. Who used the word chastising? The defendant. I'm sorry. Were there other things that might happen if you didn't follow one of the defendant's rules? Yes. What? Sometimes, occasionally, I would be left in the room, or my phone would be taken, or sometimes I would receive a punishment if it was a drastic rule that I had broken. I want to start with chastisement or spankings. Do you recall the first time the defendant spanked you? I do. Where do you recall that happening? It was in Atlanta, Georgia. How old were you? I was 17. And what do you remember happening? I remember him saying he has protocols and rules that had to be followed, and that chastising was only to help me be better and remember the small things, just in case I was not remembering the things to do. And did you know what defendant meant when he used the word chastising? No, I did not. How did you learn? I asked him what it was. What did he say? He said that it was just a spanking to help me remember. And I think you testified that it was in Atlanta that the first time the defendant spanked you. Is that correct? Yes. Where in Atlanta were you? We were in a hotel. I believe the Hyatt. And what, if anything, do you remember about that particular hotel room? I remember that we were in a room and that number was 407, and I thought that it was a bizarre because my area code for my cell phone was 407. So that was a number in the hotel room, yes? Now, do you recall what prompted the rule, or do you recall what prompted the defendant to tell you about these chastisements and to spank you that day in room 407 in Atlanta? I did something that he didn't like, and he said that it was time to teach me the protocols and chastising. As you sit here today, do you know what it as you sit here today, do you know what it was that you did that the defendant did not like? I do not recall. Can you describe specifically what the defendant did when he spanked you? He did make me take off my underwear. I was wearing a dress, and he did spank me 3 times, open palm. And how were you positioned when he spanked you? I was facing left, and I was standing up, and my butt was facing his left palm. How often did the defendant spank you during the time that you spent with him? I would get chastised nearly every 2 to 3 days. And when you say chastised, what are you referring to? Spankings. You testified that first time the defendant spanked you 3 times. Did the number of spankings change from a particular incident to another incident? Yes, they did. How, if at all, would you know how many spankings the defendant was going to give you? He would always tell me beforehand and to prepare what he would do. He would tell me how many spankings I would have to take, and he would just tell me to just be ready. Other than spankings, did the defendant ever physically hurt you? Yes, he did. Do you recall the first time that happened? The first time that it happened was probably in Atlanta, Georgia. And let me back up one moment regarding the testimony about your spanking. You know what? Let me get something in about these alleged spankings. So again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but here's the thing. I think I've always said, since the trial almost began, and again, I made a video about this, and the video is called "I Think I Know Where R. Kelly Went Wrong." I talked about that in all these other videos that I've done when I'm reading these transcripts. And to me, the spanking sounded more like a fetish. That's what they sounded like to me. And again, I think R. Kelly was a dominant and she was being submissive to him. I think that was a consensual relationship. I think that, she agreed to do those spankings in order to please him. And I think that R. Kelly would have been better off putting everything in writing, saying the type of relationship they would have, and also actually putting this type of stuff, in the contract. As I said before, there's tons of people in the United States and across the world who participate in these type of lifestyles. And I don't know what you guys think. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get some flack from this, but again, I think he just had a, BDSM relationship. Now that I'm reading about these spankings, I'm more and more sure that that's what this was. The only difference is that, he didn't, well, not difference, because there's probably lots of people who don't put stuff in writing into contracts. But when you're a celebrity like this, you want to put things in the contract and you want to get, people to consent to this. Otherwise you're going to find yourself in the situation that he's in. So anyway, let me just go ahead and get back to the commentary, and let me get back up to the moment regarding your testimony regarding the spankings. You testified the first time that you had taken off your underwear. Is that correct? Yes. Were those spankings that happened subsequently by the defendant? Did you always have your underwear off? Yes. Can you describe to the jury how hard the defendant would spank you? Yes. He would leave bruises sometimes, like it would make my skin tear. How did you? Really? You can leave. I don't think you can leave bruises with your hand. Maybe you can. I don't know. I'm not an expert spanker, so I don't know. Um, how did it make you feel? Terrible. Did it hurt? It would. Yes. Before I interrupted you, you were about to test. You were about to testify about the first time you remember the defendant physically hurt you, other than these spankings. And I think you testified that you were in Atlanta. Do you recall what started the particular incident? He had received the text message. Did you see the text message? He showed me, yes. Who did the defendant tell you the text message was from? He said that it was from a a man by the name of Divine. And did you see the text message yourself? I did, yes. What was the text message? It was my name and a rat emoji. And at the time, the text message, or that you saw the text message, did you know who Divine was? I did not. What happened after the defendant received the text message? He had taken my phone and asked me who had I been talking to. And backing up for a moment, you testified that this happened in Atlanta. Do you recall how old you were? I was 17. What, if anything, did the defendant say when he took your phone? He said that I had 30 seconds to be honest and to puke. And if I left out any small details, that it would go up, that it would go up to, I'm sorry. And if I left out any small details, that it would go up in that room. Now, when you said he told you that you had 30 seconds to be honest and to puke, what did he mean by that? Meaning, like, to tell him whom I had been talking to and to be completely honest with him. And when you said that you had 30 seconds to do that, or it would go up in that room, what do you mean by that? Meaning that there would be no chastising, meaning that it would really be a physical altercation. How did you respond? I was honest, but I did leave out the details, and he did begin to physically hit me. What were you honest? What were you honest? What did you tell the defendant? I told him that I had been talking to Mia. Who is Mia again? Mia is she was my best friend at the time. You said that you left out the details. What did what did you recall leaving out? I told him I had left out that we had been intimate and that I had expressed that to Mia. I'm sorry. So what did you not tell the defendant? I did not tell him that we were being intimate. That who was being intimate? I'm confused as hell. Me and the defendant. Okay. Who had you told that you and the defendant were intimate? I had told my best friend Mia. Okay. Did you leave out the fact that you told Mia that you and the defendant had been intimate? Yes, I did. How did the defendant respond? He began to hit me. What happened after that? He continuously began to hit me, and in between he would ask me, "Are you ready to be honest?" And I would say, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he would continue to hit me. How was he hitting you? He was hitting me with an open palm with a closed palm. Where on your body was he hitting you? Objection, leading. Well, where was he hitting you is not leading. Mr. Kenneth, on your body is. The, well, uh, the court, well, it's not overruled. He hit me all over. He would hit me in the face, in my arms, on my butt, all over my body. What happened? I continued to not be honest with him, and then he went in his closet and grabbed one of his Air Force One shoes. So this is the famed, alleged Air Force One shoe beating that she talks about. So she actually talks about this, I think, on the Sun magazine. I think they do an interview with her, and then she talks about how she was beat with an Air Force One or something like that. So let's see what's actually in this transcript here. I continued to not be honest with him, and he went in his closet and grabbed one of his Air Force One shoes. What, if anything, did he do with the shoes? He continued to hit me until I finally broke. What did he use to hit you then? An Air Force One, size 12. Do you remember where on your body he hit you? He hit me all over with his shoe. Uh, I'm sorry. He hit me all over. And then she goes, with his shoe? Yes. How, if at all, did you react when the defendant was hitting you with the shoe? I was running from him in our master bedroom in Atlanta. I remember we were in the restroom, and somehow we ended up all the way in the master bedroom, and I was trying to run from him and fight him back, but I'm literally no match. How tall are you? I'm 4'11". Do you remember how much you weighed back then in 2015? I was about 98 pounds. How tall is the defendant? He's 6 foot. How did that end? What happened? After that, I admitted to everything, and I did tell him what I had told Mia, that we had been intimate, and he told me how we would fix it. And then he told Juice to come in the bedroom, and he told her to run your sister a bath water. Now you said the defendant said, "How do you fix it?" What did the defendant say to do? He then told me to text Mia, and he told me exactly what to say to Mia in the text message. Did you do that? I did, yes. You said that Juice then ran a bath for you. Is that correct? Yes. Where did that happen? It happened in our master bedroom. And when you say master bedroom, what are you referring to? What residence? What house? At the big house. In Atlanta? Yes. Do you know where Juice was when the defendant was assaulting you? I do not know. Do you know where the defendant went when did Juice in fact run your bath? Yes, she did. Do you know where the defendant went when Juice came and ran your bath? No, I do not. Did you eventually meet an individual named Divine? Yes, years later. Yes. Do you remember approximately when you met him? I met him, I believe, in year of 2020. I'm trying to figure out if I'm pronouncing his name right. Divine. Yeah, Divine. That's his name, I guess. Divine. Okay. What, if anything, did Divine show you? Divine had shown me that same text, which was the last text that he had sent the defendant. And what was in the text? It was my name with the rat emoji. You testified that at times the defendants had you stay in a room. Is that right? Yes. Do you remember the first time the defendant had you stay in the room? It was in 2015. What happened? It was in the previous evidence that you had showed where he had, I'm sorry, I'm fucking this up. It was the previous evidence that you had showed where he said that I could not leave the room. Can you describe the location that was? I do not recall, but I do know that we were on the West Coast. Okay, do you remember what prompted him to tell you that you couldn't leave the room? No, he had expressed that it was a rule of his. Okay, so let me back up. I think you testified earlier that one of the ways, if you broke a rule, one thing that the defendant sometimes did was had you stay in the room. Is that correct? Yes, yes. Did there come a time when the defendant, in fact, made you stay in the room because you had broken a rule? Yes. Do you remember the first time the defendant that happened? Yes. Where did that happen? That happened in Chicago. Where in Chicago? At the studio on Ohio Street. And do you remember what led to that? Yes. What happened? I had gone shopping with Juice, and she tried to convince me to get sweats in a size large, and I had got them in extra small, and he had told me that anything that came from her was coming from him, and I didn't listen to her. And when you said he had told you that anything that came from her was coming from him, who is the him in that sentence? The defendant. And who is the her in that sentence? Juice. Do you recall whether or not? I wonder what this Juice looks like, because she seems to be the bottom chick, as they say. Do you recall whether or not what size sweats you brought that day? I did buy extra small from Hollister. What is Hollister? Hollister is a clothing store for like a lot of teens. What happened? Do you remember where you went after you went shopping that day? Yes, we went back to the studio on Ohio Street. Yes. What happened when you got back to the studio? I tried on my cloths like I usually do after I was done shopping, and I tried on my sweats. And who, if anyone, was present when you tried on your sweats? Him and Juice were present. The defendant and Juice. Yes. What happened? He had saw the sweats on me, and he wasn't happy. And he then said, "Didn't Juice tell me to get size large?" And I said, "Yes." You said the defendant wasn't happy. What made you believe the defendant wasn't happy? Because I went against what Juice told me to do. What, if anything, did the defendant do or say through that made you think he wasn't happy? He did in fact leave that room. And when you say he did in fact leave you in that room, what are you talking about? I was in the 5 star at the time, and he basically felt that I felt like I didn't do anything wrong, and so as a punishment, he said I could not leave out of the room until I admit to what I had done. You mentioned the 5 star. What do you mean 5 star? The 5 star was a room inside the Ohio Street studio, which he would have parties on the weekend. And when you were showing, uh, and when you were showing, when were you trying? I'm sorry. And when you were showing, when were you trying on the cloths that he had purchased in front of the defendant? And Juice, where in the studio were you? We were in the 5 star. And how did the defendants express to you that he wanted you to stay in the 5 star room? He told me that I cannot leave out of this room until I admit what I should have done. And what happened then? I didn't leave outside the room for about 3 to 4 days. What were the defendants? I'm sorry. Where was the defendants when you were in the room? I don't know. Did you see him? Um, did you see him? What did you mean? While you were in the room for um, 3 to 4 days, what, if any, contact did you have with the defendant? Oh, he would come in and he would check on me and he would ask me, was I ready to be honest? And I would express that I didn't have anything to be honest about, and he would leave again. What, if anything, did you understand the defendant wanted you to do while you were in the 5 star room at the Ohio Street? He wanted me to admit that I would have to listen to Juice and that I would have gotten the sweats in a size large. What, if anything, did you eat while you were in the room? Fruit was brought to me, and I wouldn't know because they would knock on the door. And when you say they would knock on the door, what specifically did you hear? I would just hear a knock on the door. And what, if anything, would you do when you heard a knock on the door? The defendant would always tell me anytime I heard a knock to wait 30 seconds before opening the door to give whomever it was to leave. And so as you sit there here today, do you know who brought you the food while you were in the five-star room for 3 to 4 days? I do not. Did there come a time, well, you testified that you were in there for 3 to 4 days. What, if anything, happened that allowed you finally to leave the room? I had admitted that I was wrong and that I should have had listened to Juice. How did you admit that you were wrong? I had physically told him when he had came in the room. How did he spend one? I'm sorry. How did he respond once you told him that you were wrong? He was happy. Objection. Mr. Kennick, objection. The court, well, when you say he was happy, how do you know that? The witness, because afterwards I immediately left the room and he let me go into the studio with him. Now, to be clear, the room where you were staying for the 3 to 4 days, was there a lock on the door? There is not. And what, if anything, do you think would have happened if you did walk out the room? I would get in trouble even more. And what do you think? What do you mean by that? I didn't know what would happen, but I just knew that I would probably get in even more trouble if I did choose to leave out that room. You testified earlier about a time in which the defendant used his shoe to hit you. Do you recall that? Yes, I do. Aside from spanking, did you ever see the defendant physically hit or assault another of those females that were living with him? Yes, I have. What did you see? Personally, what did you see? I have seen him slap his other living girlfriends open palm. I have seen him drag them by the hair. I have seen him punch them in their face and all over their bodies. And I have also seen him hit with objects. What objects have you seen the defendant hit them with? I have seen the defendant also use shoes, and also once I did see him use a cord of some sort. How did that make you feel? I felt like I needed to listen even more because that could also happen to me. All right, so you know what? Let me take a break here. So I am just not buying that, she's trapped in this room, and if she leaves, there's going to be dire consequences. She basically told you there was no lock on the door. And basically, there were no threats made to her, right? So what the prosecutor is trying to do is that they're trying to say that even though there were no threats made to her, right? This is the subtext, right? Even though there's no threats made to her, they're trying to say, oh, well, he beat her with a shoe before. Oh, and he beat these other girls. So I believe that if I leave this room, this is going to happen to me. I'm not buying it. I'm still just seeing that you were in this relationship because you chose to be. If you wanted to leave that room, you could have just left the room. But you damn well know that if you leave that room, that the relationship is going to end. And that was the only thing that was keeping her in the room, was the thought that the relationship would end and she would be cut off from from the fabulous lifestyle that she had, the shopping, the eating at fabulous restaurants, so on and so forth. That was what was in her mind. She wasn't concerned with being beat. No threats were, because no threats were made against her, right? She was just concerned about losing that fabulous lifestyle. You can't keep a person in a room without their consent. That's just the way it is, especially with no locks or on the doors, right? So if a person stays in a room, it's because they wanted to. She could have gotten out of that room and she could have left that hotel and just went back to Florida where she was living, right? So let's move on. The court, Mrs. Giddens, just whenever you're ready, um, if it's a good time to break, I just wanted to give the jurors their afternoon break. Mrs. Giddens, can we take a break right now? The court. Okay. So, folks, we'll break for 15 minutes. Please don't talk about the case at all, but we'll see you in 15 minutes. Right. So they go for break. Right. And I probably need a break myself too. Man, I don't know how much longer this thing is gonna go. I'm trying to get through this stuff. I've been at it for about an hour. Let's see what I should do. I think I'll read a couple more pages and then I'll lay it down. All right, everybody sit down. All right, before we break, Your Honor, just relating to the government eliciting testimony at the court. I can't hear you. Mr. Kennett, as it relates to the government eliciting testimony regarding Kelly's prior criminal proceeding, right. Mr. Kennett, I would we will consent to the government actually asking him about it being a prior proceeding, a prior court proceeding. The court, I mean, I can't remember I'm going to have to go back and look at what my ruling was at the time. You didn't take advantage of it. But I think it should be the same ruling. I mean, the reason is the same. Mr. Koenig, well, I think your ruling was with another witness, and at that time you indicated that the door was open. There's going to be a door opening with respect to this witness, and it wasn't elicited at the time, and the government did not go back on redirect and ask the witness anything about it. The court, I think she tried and I sustained the objection because it was beyond the scope. That's my recollection. Mr. Giddens, I know. The court, well, if you call it a prior proceeding, I mean, the point is, in addition to, it's not just because I made the ruling with respect to the other witness, it's because it's relevant to establish why she did what she did. So I'll permit it for the purpose, but you can refer to it as a prior proceeding. Mrs. Giddens, but I think, Your Honor, you previously had advised that there's already been testimony in the record about the prior court proceeding. Here, the witness, I think, needs to explain that the reason why she was not truthful about her age was because the defendant was on trial for a crime involving a minor. Well, you can say, I don't think you'll have a problem that there was testimony, that there was a trial, and you can say that the subject was what did we agree before? You don't have to say it's a criminal trial. I mean, it's just not necessary. A trial. It's a trial involving conduct with a minor. Mr. Kennedy, I would object to that, Your Honor. I think that if there's a question asked where, in order for the witness to, I guess, give what she thinks is the rationale for her saying that she was 18, well, there was a prior court proceeding. The court, that's what I just said. Right, but not regarding the minor. The court, no. We are, no. I mean, the whole reason, just the fact that it's a prior proceeding doesn't really say a whole lot, but that's what her concern was, that it was because she was also a minor. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any sense. Mr. Koenig, Judge, the court, I mean, do you plan to cross-examine her about it like you did the last witness about why she lied to him about how old she was? I did focus on that with, I'm sorry, I didn't focus on that with this. I understand. As I recall from the 302S, she was saying that it was her parents that told her to tell him that she was 18, nothing to do with her. It wasn't her thought. It was her parents' thought, her mother's thought. The court, well, let's do this. You know what can Well, let's do this. You know, you can do the cross-examination with her in just an excess of caution. I'll do what I did in the last time. If you question her about that and the door is open, I'll permit the government to bring out more information about that, and it will be really just the same thing. So you can continue examination when you do your cross. If you challenge her on that as you did the last witness, then I'll let the government ask what they're going to ask. Mr. Kennedy, very well. Mrs. Geddes, so Your Honor, may I go back and let the witness know what I previously told them? All right. But with respect to when I asked her about what, If anything the defendant said about the reason for the letter, she will answer the defendant told her that it was because the attorneys told him to do it. I assume she had that statement. The court, she already said that. Mrs. Geddes, no, I hadn't asked this witness. But she did say something about talking to lawyers, didn't she? She did. I think it's fine that he's talking to lawyers. I don't understand counsel to be objecting to that. The discrete objection is referring to the prior criminal proceeding, which I did preclude inquiry on, and I permitted it the last time because the defense quite clearly opened the door to it. It's a fair point that he hasn't really opened the door on this one because he hasn't had a chance to ask her any questions. So let's do it the same way. We did it the last time, and if you need to confer with the witness just to straighten that out, go ahead and do it. All right. See you in a few minutes. All right. The court, all right. Do we have everybody we need to have? Okay. Let's get the jury. The court, all right. Are we ready to resume the direct examination? Go ahead. Thank you. The witness is reminded she's still under oath. Yes, thank you. Man. You testified before we broke about a time when the defendant told you to stay in the room in Ohio Street Studio. Other than Ohio Street Studio, were there any other occasions where the defendant made you stay for periods of time? Yes. What other locations you recall the defendant made you stay for periods of time as a result of violating one of the defendant's rules in his eyes? Aside from the studios, that studio he later, aside from that studio, the studio that he later had, and that and the Atlanta house, the tour bus, you mentioned a studio that the defendant later had. Do you remember where that studio was? It was Justine Street. The studio was located on Justine Street. Yes. In what city? Chicago. You also mentioned a tour bus. Do you remember at a time when the defendant told you to stay on the tour bus? Yes, I do. Do you remember where the do you remember where you were located where the tour bus was at the time? Atlanta, Georgia. And do you recall what led to the defendant telling you that you needed to stay on the tour bus? I had broken one of his rules and I did not admit to breaking one of the rules. Do you remember the particular rule that you broke that day? I do not. Do you remember approximately when it was that the defendant had stayed on the bus in Atlanta? It was for about 3 days. And do you remember approximately when, either in terms of your age or in terms of the time frame, this happened? I believe that this happened 2016 or 17. I don't recall. And what, if anything, do you recall? I'm sorry. And what, if anything, damn. And what, if anything, did you do while you were on the tour bus? There wasn't nothing much that I could do, but just wait for him to come. And what, if anything, did you understand the defendant wanted you to do while you were on the tour bus? Mr. Koenig, objection. The court, well, did he tell you what you were supposed to do while you were on the bus? Witness, it was just a punishment to not be around him. Do you recall whether you had food at the time in Atlanta when you were on the tour bus? For how long did you say it was? About 3 days. Do you recall whether or not you had food while you were on the bus for about 3 days? I did, yes. And how did you receive the food? There was a fridge and a microwave, and occasionally, if I ate, they would bring it. They would bring it and leave it underneath the curtain. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. There was a fridge and a microwave, and occasionally, if he ate, they would bring it and leave it underneath the curtain. And when you say the curtain, what are you referring to? The tour bus. There was a curtain in the front where no one could see inside of the back of the tour bus. And you said that they would bring it to you? Do you see who's bringing the food? Never. How would you know that the food was ready or that there was food for you? because I would hear them put it underneath the curtain, and then I would hear the tour bus shut and lock. And just to be clear again, was the tour bus locked from the inside? I don't know. I never tried to open it. It's always been unlocked, getting off, getting on or off for me. Okay, but when you were on the tour bus that day for a period of time, didn't you try to open it? Is that where you were? I'm sorry, isn't that what you were saying? Yes, I did not. So again, they're going down with this line of questioning to try to make it look like she was locked inside a bus. But I know of no vehicles that you can lock from the outside, that whereas someone inside couldn't get out. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. Tell me where they're making vehicles like that, please. Now, to your knowledge, were any of the other females who were living with the defendant at the time ever subjected to the same punishment, that they had to stay in the room or location for a period of days on account of the defendants believing they had violated a rule? Yes. How did you know that? Because they would not be around for a few days and we would just know not to ask. Not to ask whom? Him, like we were, him, like were, sorry, him, like where were they? And again, whom are you referring to? The defendant. Do you recall that what happened in December 28th of 2015? I do not. Mrs. Geddes, I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as 935B. Do you recognize what's shown in 935B? I do, yes. Does that refresh your recollection as to what, if anything, happened December 28th, 2015? It does, yes. And that date, December 28th, how old were you? What year is this? 2015. Yes, I was 17. And were you turning 18? December 30th. And when were you turning 18? December 30th. What, if anything, do you recall happened December 28th of 2015? Me and the defendant had gotten into an argument. And do you recall the nature of the argument? Yes, I do. What was it about? He had expressed to me that he didn't celebrate holidays because he no longer had his family, and he felt if he did not want to celebrate the holidays, I could have been home with my family celebrating. Did you tell the defendant that? I did, yes. How did the defendant respond? He was upset with me. What, if anything, did the defendant do or say towards you? He did make me leave. Stay. I'm sorry. He did make me leave. Stay in the room. Huh? Do you recall what room you were in? This was at the studio. What was the studio? On Justine. And was that in downtown Chicago? Yes. The government the government exhibit 935B, generally speaking, what are those? What is that? It's a text message of what I sent my best friend at the time. On what date? December 29th. And then they put that into evidence. Can you starting from the bottom, can you read the text message starting from the bottom and moving up? And just to be clear, who wrote these text messages? I sent the text messages. Okay. Can you read what's shown on 935B, beginning where my pen is pointing? Yes. I just felt to rebel, so I did. And then I was like, can I take a shower? Can I take a shower? And he was like, no, you're going to stay in the room until you tell me why you, and there were three dots after that. What does that represent? There was more text message, just not shown on this particular, yes. And reading above that, what did you write? First of all, I never had an attitude. You always think someone's mad. Above that. And then I kept calling and texting him over and over. And above that. And he was like, no, you text me why you had an attitude first. In those text messages where you refer to he, who are you referring to? The defendant. And in the first text message that you read, the one on the bottom where your pen is pointing, where it says, and he was like, no, you're going to stay in the room until you tell me why. And then it continues. What did you mean by that? I had expressed to him that I had an attitude because if he didn't want to celebrate Christmas, I could have been home. What do you mean by saying that? He was like, no, you're going to stay in the room, meaning that I could not leave the room until I apologized for the attitude. Do you remember what room within Justine Street studio you were in? The control room. What, if anything, did you understand that? What, if anything, did you do while you were in that room? There was nothing in that room for me to do. There was only a TV in that room. What, if any, communication did you have with the defendant? I did. I did have my phone. However, he was ignoring all the calls and texts and that I had until I had admitted why I had an attitude. How would you? Did you eventually admit that you had an attitude? I did. Yes. Do you believe? Do you believe you in fact had an attitude? I did not. No. How did you admit the defendant that you had an attitude? How did you convey that to the defendant? I would have to have been really remorseful, and I would have fed his ego. Specifically, what would you specifically what damn, I can't even read. Specifically, what would you have done to convey that to the defendant? I would have to have said exactly what he wanted to hear. What did you say to that? To the defendant? To his face? Yes. Did you ever write letters? Yes, I did. What letters would you write? I would write many letters. When you were in the room as a result of violating the rule, you would even you would I'm sorry. When you were in the room as a result of violating the rule, would you ever write letters to the defendant? Yes, I would. If I did not have my phone, yes. Were there times when you were in the room without your phone? Yes. Why would you be in the room without your phone? Because he would take it as punishment. What would you write in the letters? I would have to be it would have to be an apology for a rule that I had broken. What, if anything, would you do when the what, if anything, would you do with the letter that you wrote? I would have to give it to him, and he would basically read it. How would you give it to the defendant? I would just give him the sheet of paper, and sometimes he would make me read it in front of him, or he would leave with it and then come back at another time. Do you recall an occasion where you first? Do you recall an occasion where you first? I'm sorry. Do you recall an occasion where your first letter was not sufficient? Yes, I do. What happened? If it was an attitude in the letter, then I would still be stuck in the room, and I would. If there was an attitude in the letter, then I would still be stuck in the room, and I would have to rewrite the letter. Who determined if the letter was an attitude in the letter? The defendant, Mrs. Geddes. I'm showing my approach, Your Honor. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm showing may I approach, Your Honor. Yes. I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 926. Do you recognize what's shown in Government Exhibit 926? Yes, I do. Generally speaking, what are they? This is a picture of the studio on 209 North Justine, 209 Justine Street. And actually, I think I am going to stop here. We're on page 941. So here, basically, in my opinion, it looks like the government is trying to show a pattern of abuse, but in my personal opinion, they fail. I think the shoe may be an issue, right? You know, the alleged beatings with the shoe could be an issue, but in terms of being locked in a room or told to stay in a room, I just think that she did that of her own free will. They had a relationship, and basically he's the dominant person in a relationship. She's a submissive person in a relationship, and he basically told her to do something, and she did it, right? And that was by her consent. At any time, she could have left the room. The government does this thing where they try to pretend that the bus was locked, but everybody and their mama knows that you can't lock a vehicle from the outside where the person inside couldn't get out. I mean, vehicles just aren't made that way, right? So I don't see how the government really succeeds in this video. Uh, I guess like there could be a problem with the fighting with the shoe, right? But she specifically said she testified that she was fighting him back. So there was really just a fight, and a lot of couples fight. So um, I don't I don't see this as a big win for the government. So we're gonna stop it here, page 941. It looks like we don't have much further to go. I'm not sure if I have the cross examination in this transcript. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit to see what I have. I'm just trying to. Wow, I don't have. Oh man, I thought I had it, but I don't. I don't have the cross examination. So unfortunately, we probably won't see everything. But like I said, we'll pick up the rest of the video tomorrow. What is it? 9:46. I stopped. Maybe not tomorrow, but we'll pick up the rest of the video for sure. But it's I'm a little disappointed because it looks like I don't have the cross examination. So it's going to be interesting. Maybe I have to go and get the cross examination. But that's it for this video. Please like, share, and subscribe.